Welcome to You're All Doomed, the podcast where we'll slice and dice our way through the Friday the 13th movies, 13 minutes at a time. I'm your host, Brian.
I'm head counselor Greg.
This episode begins with the Paramount logo and ends with a red pickup truck driving down the road.
Very descriptive. Red. That signifies something. So,
Blood.
Maybe. So the very first thing we see in this movie is actually the Paramount Mountain logo, which in looking at this closely, I've decided is very likely my favorite studio logo introduction of all time.
The old one
from this era.
Yeah.
This era. That's not necessarily to say that any of my most favorite movies are Paramount. They might be. I mean, Raiders is up there, but just in terms of studio logos, this one has a very strange nostalgic effect on me, both when I think about the movies that I've seen that begin this way, and also with the style of the matte painting itself, which was done in the 50s, I believe. There's something about the lighting and the coloring that make it seem almost like an image you would see on a family vacation at the end of summer just before school is starting back up, or the illustration of a wilderness in an old textbook or something. It evokes this very nostalgic feeling in me. And then it goes into this minimalistic blue mountain graphic design version that makes me think of the very end of every Brady Bunch episode. So
Of course it does.
Of course it does.
Yeah, I think I had the same reaction. Obviously, 20th Century Fox makes me think I'm getting ready to watch a Star Wars movie.
Right.
But most recently, Universal will do that for me, thinking I'm about to watch Battlestar Galactica.
Not Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom?
No, still haven't seen that one. But yeah, this is a Sean S. Cunningham film. This is the first time we see his name. He's a buddy of Wes Craven, who went on to do a few things in the horror genre himself.
I have thoughts about Sean S. Cunningham. I was planning on saving those for the very end. Some of my thoughts have actually changed because of this experience.
Interesting. Okay.
We can certainly discuss him to any length you like now, but
I think that pretty much covers it for now. But the first title card we see, it says Camp Crystal Lake, 1958. So we were taken back in time to
60 years.
Yeah, to a more innocent time. It's 60 years from today, not from when the movie came out.
Well, right. But
so it's not entirely accurate, but we see a bunch of camp counselors sitting around, and they're singing a delightful little song, and the lyrics are, angels in heaven, I love you.
I was like, is this a Young Life camp? What?
It is. It is arguably the lamest group of counselors I've ever seen. Like, they're there before the kids show up, and they're singing.
That is actually not true, because there's a shot where the killer is walking through a cabin, and there are little kids sleeping.
That's true. Fox cabin. That's true. You're absolutely right.
Looking for the checkers and the ever-ready costume set.
That's right. So,
but these are, like, the kids have gone to bed, and that's what these counselors do, is they gather around the campfire and sing these, what I thought were religious songs. But in doing some research, I learned some interesting facts about these songs. You may have done the same. Let's hear what you got.
Well, yeah, so this is the name of this song is called Down in the Valley. It's also, depending on where you look it up, it's also known as Brigham Jail. Birmingham Jail. But it's been covered by people like Bing Crosby, Jerry Garcia.
That's interesting.
That could come up a little bit later. Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead, and Sam the Snowman himself, Burl Ives. So it's a pretty rockin' song that a lot of singer-songwriters thought was worth covering. So then we, the aforementioned Fox cabin, we see some, sleeping kids, and we see someone snooping around, and we're not quite sure what's going on, but the kids are sleeping and someone's walking through.
And there's a couple interesting facets of that shot before we get back to the songs. It introduces the iconic theme of
which, and I don't know if we want to go into the details of it here.
We don't have to, because of what we learn later bears
fair enough.
importantly on
okay.
the song.
Let's just say that I hear it differently, and I think other people hear it differently as well. But
including Doug Benson.
Right, and so we'll go into it a little bit later. But yes, it is the our introduction to a song that will become quite famous.
The other thing about that moment that I find interesting is that it sets up a point of view perspective from the killer, which they carry out a little bit throughout this movie, but then I think largely goes away later in the series, and we'll notice that in the future. But it's an interesting approach for this kind of slasher movie. They did it a little bit in Halloween, but it was when Michael Myers was young, and he put on his little Halloween mask, and you could see the eye holes in the shot. And this just this is setting up a little bit of a mystery, like who are we seeing from this perspective?
Yeah, and I think it's mostly effective, and we'll, like you said, we'll see it utilized in different ways, moving forward. But it does kind of set a very creepy tone, because you don't know if the person walking through the cabin is sinister, or if it's just a kid, that's going out to take a leak in the woods, and it could be anything, but it does kind of set a very creepy tone, rather than, these days I feel like it would be something a little bit more, ham-handed, where it would be, like a bloody pair of shoes stomping through a cabin, and you knew something was, wrong. But it just kind of...
Yeah, does this person mean harm to the children, or is this person watching over the children?
Does this person hate religious camp songs and is out to...
Are they just looking for the checkers?
It could be. I don't know. So then we cut back to our second camp song. The hits keep on coming. This one's called "Michael Row the Boat Ashore." Seems like it would be an appropriate song, a bunch of counselors sitting around, singing this sweet little song. And so you find out that it was sung by former slaves who owners had abandoned the island before the Union Navy arrived to enforce a blockade. So
cheerful.
Yay, counselors.
Yeah, and they're all white counselors.
Right. So an interesting choice of songs, especially in 1958. I feel like there were more popular hits that they could have been covering. I'm sure you also can't obtain the rights to those songs, for a movie with a budget like this. But it's
well, most of them are folk songs, or they have a history where they're probably public domain anyway. But they are kind of campfire or settlement. Sitting around the fire in the settlement songs or something.
Yeah,
so
and
they make sense.
Yeah, and I wasn't around in 1958, so maybe this was something that was very common. There was a dozen songs that people would tap into when they were sitting around a campfire, and this was one of them. But in hindsight, it just seems like a very odd choice for a song.
The third one, however, seems quite appropriate, which is called "Tom Dooley," and is about a stabbing murder that took place several years before. And the other interesting thing is that Bing Crosby also recorded a version of this song, and his recording was released in 1958.
So this was very current.
Could have been very
hit.
Contemporary for them. They're still lame, and
very much.
None of them really look like 50s kids necessarily. I don't know that everyone in the 50s walked around with, Brill cream hair and leather jackets or anything, but they look a little bit more modern in some of their dress choices than I would have expected counselors to have in 1958. But, what are you going to do?
This is where we're also introduced to Barry Jackson and Claudette Hayes. There's this little sing-along going on, and Claudette's on the guitar, and Barry is a enamored audience member, and everyone is singing. And
my philosophy of relationships is find someone who looks at you the way Claudette looks at Barry.
Dear God, there is not a man on earth, and possibly a decent amount of women, who could resist the look that she gives Barry.
That guy is going to be devoured.
She should have won an award just for that look, because it was
from the
so
Adult
effective.
Video Awards or something.
There are many categories it would fall into, but when I saw that, I couldn't believe just how effective it was, and that there was just, resistance was futile. Like
you got a stiffy while you were watching that, weren't you?
I'm not going to comment about it.
Well, so, I mean, that has the desired effect, because the next thing we know, Barry and Claudette leave the little campfire circle and scamper off to what appears to be a utility shed cabin thing. There are no other, there are no campers, there are no other counselors. It looks like a lot of equipment. It also appears to be infested with spiders, or
the perfect place.
The perfect place to fuck. I mean, you couldn't pay me to fuck in a utility shed, but you also couldn't pay me to wear a patent leather white belt with super short shorts.
And her concern is that someone's going to see them. Of all the things that are wrong with the location that they chose, she's concerned that someone outside is going to see them, getting ready to bang. So priorities, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, whatever.
But after she voices her concern about being seen, what does he do? He turns the lights on in the utility shed.
Well, and it attracts the attention of whoever we were watching or whoever we were seeing earlier from the point of view character.
As they're making out, Claudette wants to know if Mary Ann kisses as good as she does.
Wait, what?
Which is such a bizarre thing to bring up at that particular moment.
Huh.
And we don't really ever, I presume we don't find out who Mary Ann is, but this was just a very strange kind of buzzkill to a scene where suddenly you're introducing somebody else.
I forget, does he answer? What does he say? Because, I mean, there's no right answer for that. That's like, have you stopped beating your wife?
He says, how would I know?
Oh, well done.
So he denies it.
Well done, Barry.
Which is probably the only way you're going to get out of that conversation alive, because if you say no, then you're going to have an argument about, well, when did you kiss Mary Ann, and how many times did you kiss her? So yeah, he probably did the right thing there and just denied.
Yeah, what was she going for with that comment? Just to tease him or whatever?
I don't know. Stroke her ego, that she was a much better kisser. She just wanted to hear that. But even that doesn't seem like it would have made her happy. So then they go upstairs to make out. But as they're making out, someone is coming up the stairs.
Yeah, they don't really get very far into it.
No.
Someone
was close behind.
Someone was close behind them. I don't think they even really had a chance to disrobe. Barry's belt may have been unbuckled, but
yeah, because by the time they get startled and they actually see the person that came up the stairs, there's not a lot of clothes to put back on.
Right.
So they just kind of scramble, and they're like, "Oh no, we weren't doing anything. We were just hanging out up here." But so there's a couple of things that Barry doesn't finish in this scene, and one of them is the sentence to this mystery person that came up the stairs. Because as he's trying to explain his way out of the situation, suddenly he gets a knife in the gut, and he's a goner. He's dead, marking the first kill in this movie. And Claudette is trying to get away, and she's screaming. She's like, please stop, please stop. And then she gets cornered. And then we don't know exactly what happens to her, but there's a big scream, and then
freeze frame on Claudette
freeze
screaming,
frame,
basically.
And she's a goner, too.
We assume. Yeah, I mean, so we've got 4 minutes into this movie, we have the very first death, and now we know what this point of view character is up to. But we start off with a kill that is basically just a bloody stomach, someone holding their stomach and it's bloody, and then a little bit of blood coming out of Barry's mouth as well. So not terribly graphic. Not gory, at least in terms of what we might encounter later on, but fairly subdued. But we know what's happened to Barry. Barry has been stabbed in the stomach. That's a pretty painful way to go. It seems a little bit instantaneous.
That's what I was going to ask. Do you think that you would die instantly if you got stabbed in the stomach?
I don't think so. I think even if he were disemboweled, it would take a while for him to bleed out.
Well, I also feel like I'd like to think I'd still have a little bit of fight in me. So if I got stabbed in the stomach, yes, it's going to hurt, but I feel like I'd still have a reaction to kind of fight back.
Yes.
And say, hold on.
He folds up like a lawn chair.
Yeah, it's just like gut in the stomach, and I'm dead.
Well, he struck me as a little bit of a panty waist to begin with. I mean, when they're interrupted in whatever they were getting into, he's like, "We weren't doing anything," and it's just sort of like, be a man, Barry. Just say, "Oh, you caught us," sorry. So I'm not terribly surprised that he just keels over and probably sits there whimpering while his girlfriend gets taken care of next.
So Barry didn't last very long, but now that he's gone, we can talk about who he was played by, which was Willie Adams, and we can't even really say that he was an actor because he wasn't. He was actually a PA on the set of the movie, and they needed someone to play the role, and he looked like an all-American kid, and so they threw him in, and he did his little 2-minute scene and got stabbed, and will forever be known as the first victim in the Friday the 13th movies. Unfortunately, he also died shortly after the movie was shot in a car accident.
Car accident, right? Yeah, wow.
So, not quite sure if there's a Friday the 13th curse yet for actors that have been in the movie, but it certainly was a short-lived acting career.
Yeah,
for
that was his only
Mr.
credit,
Adams.
I think, right?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, and then Claudette. There's not much I can find about Claudette. If you do a Google search for her, there's a rather there's a picture that pops up of a rather large-chested woman that could be the actress in present day. But
Deborah S. Hayes.
Right, but there's not a lot that comes up about what she might be doing these days other than
this was her
clearly
only
getting
acting credit on IMDb, I saw.
Right, yeah. So she maybe used the money to get a boob job and then disappeared for a while.
I did see some indication that the two of them may have been dating in real life.
Interesting.
Which may have added to the chemistry that we witnessed around the campfire. That may not be true, but I did see that in at least one place. So that would kind of make sense.
Yeah.
Especially if neither of them were professional actors that went on to other things. But
yeah, it was just easy to kind of throw them in there. And
yeah. So let's go back to the end of Claudette. We have no idea exactly what happened to her. It's indicated later that she's dead, but this is one of those things where I could see some terrible fan fiction being written where, Friday the 13th, part 13, Claudette comes back and like, what? So it's interesting that they chose to freeze frame with her screaming like that. I almost feel like what they were trying to do with these first two deaths was ease the audience into what this movie was and where we were going to go, because everything that we've seen in this first 4.5 minutes is about as gory as a movie like Psycho from the 60s or something.
Right.
So the audience, the movie-going audience at that point was used to seeing some violence, used to implied violence with a knife, maybe a little bit of blood, but nothing terribly graphic. And even violence against women in Psycho was mostly implied through editing and such. You never see Janet Leigh getting stabbed on screen. It's just the way that they framed the shots and edited it. You're sure that's what's happening, but you never see the knife plunging in. And so I wonder if they were kind of going for something like that with these first two kills.
Yeah, I was wondering that too, because I don't have a lot of history with horror movies that date back beyond, maybe the mid to early 70s. So I don't know how shocking these kills were. As someone, getting stabbed in the gut, was it a big deal in 1980?
Yeah, what was
when
the reaction in the
or
theater? Were people screaming, or was it just like, oh, okay, that's where we're going?
Yeah, or maybe it's the unseen assailant that makes it so shocking. I don't know. I don't really have a lot of context with that, but it was interesting to see that, perhaps this was a big deal back then, but when you watch it now, it just seems very tame by horror movie standards of today, where they'll spend 30 seconds showing how someone's going to die rather than just do like a quick cut of blood coming out of the corner of someone's mouth. But after that freeze frame of Claudette, suddenly we get the Friday the 13th logo coming flying at us, and then for some reason crashing through some glass.
Yeah, is that supposed to like break the lens of the camera so it feels like we're
I don't understand this. When you're watching it at home, you can argue that it's busting through your TV screen. And, I don't think anyone's going to fall for that illusion, but at least you can kind of argue it. But when you're watching it in a movie theater, which is the first place anyone is going to see it, movie screens in theaters are not made of glass, they're made of fabric, so it doesn't make sense that it would be shattering. And I don't know if anyone was shocked at all by seeing
or like ducked in their seats,
like, oh my god, like the old silent film with the train coming at you, where everyone thought the train was going to hit them. I don't think it had the same effect, and I don't know what they were trying to achieve with it. But.
Yeah, and it's not a very spooky logo design either. It's not a creepy font. It's gray and white. I'm kind of glad they didn't overdo it with like dripping blood or something cheesy like that. But it's just kind of it almost looks like a doorbuster at the auto parts store. It's just like a sale on Saturday kind of logo or something busting through your TV screen. So
yeah, it's like one of the kids in elementary school that just got out of art class and learned how to draw 3D lettering, and this was the logo that they came up with. Like, look, it's 3D. It's so dimensional and thick.
And then it cuts into some traditional credits. The very first one we see is director of photography Barry Adams. So right off the bat, we have a whole bunch of Barrys in this movie.
Right. Maybe that's how they got his name. I thought it was odd that the second credit we've seen is the art director, Virginia Field. So I don't know if she ponied up some money to get this thing made or what, but that's just a very odd credit to see, is the second one to come up on the screen.
Yeah, and then we get into some executive producer credits and casting and special effects by some noteworthy people that I'm sure we'll talk about at some point.
And music by Harry Manfredini, who's as of this recording date, his 75th birthday is tomorrow.
Oh, well, happy birthday.
So happy birthday.
That guy rules.
Yes, he does. And it's also written by Victor Miller. We'll have a few things to say about Mr. Miller a little bit later. So then we get yet another title card. This time it says Friday, June 13th, The Present. Now, in the case of this movie, the present is 1979. You can also, it depends where you look, too. Some people say it's 1980 because the movie came out in 1980.
Fascinating.
But I saw different ones, but I tend to believe that it's 79 because if the movie came out in 1980, then you're talking about events that happened in the past, not necessarily happened immediately before the release of this movie. I don't know. So what do you think?
If you're constructing some sort of timeline, which really you should just throw out the window.
Oh, I doubt the timelines would be important for a movie.
Yeah, I mean, I just
or a
assumed
franchise
it was
like this.
I assumed it was 1980, but
okay, interesting.
You could very well be right.
I saw it really depended on where you looked. Sometimes it was 79, sometimes it was 80, but I don't really have. It doesn't matter. Let's just put it that way.
And the very first thing we see in the present day is Frank's Delicatessen.
Woohoo!
Yeah, so we see this little happy-looking town with a little stream running through it and a bridge, and it's a bright, sunny day. So it looks like things are happier than they were back in 1958.
What types of things do you think a Frank's Delicatessen serves?
But they have a really good Reuben.
I was hoping they'd have a really good Reuben.
Or it's a little dilapidated looking. Some of the windows might actually be boarded up, so I'm not sure that Frank's is still open for business.
You could argue that the whole town is boarded up.
This is a good point. We do know they serve Coca-Cola because there are two circular Coca-Cola signs on either side of Frank's Delicatessen sign. So, and it appears to stretch into the building next door as well. Frank's at one point at least was quite a place.
A booming business, perhaps. We also see a girl backpacking through the empty town. There's absolutely no one on the street. There's no one parked on the street. There's no one walking. There's just this girl in her backpack. And she goes up to a gas station and decides she's going to start talking to a dog. Now,
a dog with presumably the most visible boner ever?
Well, It's obviously the first girl that he's seen in a long time. Let's just put it that way. So she starts talking to the dog and asks the dog if it speaks English. And all I could think of was the car park attendant from Ferris Bueller. Where the dog turns to her and goes, "What country do you think this is, man?" So then she turns to the dog and asks her how far Camp Crystal Lake is, and the dog whimpers. And she is concerned by that only because it seems like the dog is telling her that it's too far. I would like to think that the dog is actually the most reliable doomsayer in town, and that he's like, no,
Right.
don't go to Camp Crystal Lake. But, he doesn't speak English, so he can't say that.
If only Scooby-Doo were there.
Right, and she just completely ignores his warnings.
And continues on her way. In what I would consider possibly the most geographically confusing town I've ever seen. There's tons of hills, and the main street seems to curve around a bend and go up a hillock or something. I mean, I can't really get quite a sense of what the layout of this town is, but it definitely does look run down the more we see of it.
And it looks like it's only, in reality, it's probably only a block, but they keep shooting it from all these different weird angles to make it seem like she's covering a lot of ground, when in reality, I don't think she's doing anything. She just basically went around the corner from Frank's Delicatessen, and that's where the gas station was.
Yeah, very likely. And then she goes into a diner.
It seems nice.
It does.
Really nice.
It does. Staffed by a couple of people, and then there are some customers there. But there's a hostess / server, and then
Trudy.
Oh,
her name is Trudy.
Oh,
yes.
Okay.
She's well known in town. Trudy will treat you well.
She'll treat you right. Okay. And then we also have a hulking busboy who stares directly at the camera.
Look, I don't want to ruin the rest of this movie, but I'm just going to tell you right now that dude is absolutely the killer.
I mean, right?
There's no chance that there is any other suspect in town. If that dude has killed hundreds of people.
Yeah, or at least if he's not responsible for the murders that were being shown in this movie, he killed everyone else in this town, and that's why everything's closed.
The camera is fixated on him for some reason, and I don't know if they're...
And vice versa.
Right, and I don't know if that's intentional, like if they're trying to start creating a list of possible suspects for us where we're supposed to think. I'm totally convinced he did it, so mission accomplished.
Right, movie's over.
Yeah, but it's interesting that he's just so prominent in this scene.
And yes, that's the only reason I can think he would even be in this movie, let alone be so prominently focused on. But the look on his face is not one of menace. He has kind of a gentle inquisitiveness that I find the more I watch it, the more I feel welcomed by this character. He looks concerned.
Well, now that you say that, I wonder if he knows as much as the dog knows, but maybe he just can't communicate it.
He would whimper
like the dog. Yeah, he would
he
whimper
can't
as
speak
well.
English.
Maybe
so.
he's mute and can't get it out, and so he's just, it's like the guy in Get Out who's just, can't say anything until the hypnosis is snapped, and then suddenly the first thing he says is, "No, don't go to Camp Crystal Lake. You don't want to go there."
Right.
He's just, doomed to live this life of sweeping the same spot of the floor
and
of this
watching
diner,
these terrible things unfold,
and staring at the weird camera that happens to be over the shoulder of Trudy.
He's played by an actor named Erwin Keyes, who sadly died in 2015. In looking up some of his other credits, I was thrilled to see that he appeared in an episode of Growing Pains. So I'm going to try and track down the complete series on Blu-ray. And
was he one of Boner's friends?
He might have been one of departed Boner's friends.
I just wanted an excuse to have two Boner references in the same episode.
Comments in the same episode. But you look back at the luminaries that showed up on Growing Pains. Brad Pitt showed up a couple times. Matthew Perry was on an episode. Erwin Keyes. I'm thinking we might want to do a Growing Pains podcast.
So the girl with the backpack, her name is Annie, and as she's in the diner, she's clearly trying to get somewhere and doesn't know how to get there. So she asks the few people that are in the diner how far Camp Crystal Lake is from here. How does she not know where the camp is? She's going to work there for the summer, and she has no idea how far she is or where it is.
And how did she get this far?
Exactly. So she's just hoping that the next town that she gets to is getting her a little bit closer. But when she asks the question at the diner, there's practically a record scratch sound effect that, everyone just stops dead in their tracks, and they turn, they drop their sandwiches, they, spit their coffee out across the bar. And it's just the most preposterous thing in the world, because we're led to believe that it's at least 29, 30 years after the fact. And they're still eliciting this type of reaction when someone comes into town and asks this question.
Was this such a horrible thing that they're still terrified
that,
of this?
2 kids got killed, shit happens, but it was 30 years ago. And there really nothing else going on in town that you're still hung up on this?
No, it was 20 years ago, but still.
Whatever. I don't do math. Yeah.
No, you're right. I mean, enough time has passed that it seems odd that the town would react with such a record scratch, dishes dropping kind of horror.
Yeah, and Trudy behind the counter actually turns the radio down just to make sure, like, I want you to hear every word that I'm saying, so I'm going to turn this shitty music down so you can hear me.
So, is Annie cute? This is our first really good look at her, at least close up.
I think she's 1979/1980 cute. As far as this town is concerned, she's the most beautiful woman in the world.
Probably true.
They've never seen anyone quite like her before.
We haven't seen the busboy's sister.
That's true.
Yeah, I mean, she's a little too perky. Her personality's a little too peppy for me.
Well, I think that's in contrast to the numbskulls in the diner that are just staring into their food and clearly have no personality or enthusiasm, and so when this girl comes in, it's just kind of jarring. But yeah, I feel like she'd be fun to go out on a date with the first time, but after a few dates, she would be exhausting. Yeah. Her personality is just a little
constantly talking to dogs. And
right. Yeah. Asking random animals if they speak English.
Yeah, she'd probably introduce you to all of her stuffed animals when you went back to her place to make out. But then she meets Enos.
Good old Enos.
Good old Enos. Who, I'm just going to flat out say, is my favorite character in this movie.
Wow, I mean, we're not that far into the movie, and you're already to make that. Okay,
I love this guy, but he basically he offers her a ride to get her closer to where she's going. It seems he's headed out that way.
Yeah, he says the camp is 20 miles away, and he's going somewhat in that direction, and he can basically drop her off halfway. Yeah,
he's a tow truck driver. He's got some sort of utility truck vehicle. He's not a long haul trucker or anything. He seems to be kind of local lugging, but she hops in his truck, and so this guy.
Well, before they get in the truck, they're walking to the truck, and Enos asks if all the girls at the camp are going to be as hot as she is. Which 30 seconds ago they were all telling her, "Do not go to the camp. It's a bad idea. What are you doing here?" And now all Enos cares about is, there going to be other hotties there too?
I'm not sure that's what he's getting at, but yes, that's a weird first impression to make with this young woman.
Oh, are you wondering if?
I think he might be expressing concern that a camp full of attractive counselors
could be problematic.
But from her perspective, all she knows is this middle-aged man is suddenly flirting with her, but. He seems to be doing it in a warm and welcoming way. He doesn't seem creepy like most of the other townspeople do.
Right, like when he puts his hands firmly on her ass to help her get into the truck, he does it in a very in gentle and sweet manner. And she doesn't flinch. She does not even care.
It's true.
This is not.
We live in a different age.
These are different days.
We live in a different age, but. they settle into the truck to begin their journey. And
You're forgetting a pretty big part before they get in the truck.
Okay.
They're approached by someone.
Oh, you're
someone
right.
else in town.
Rewind, please.
So, out of nowhere, this guy comes up to Annie and Enos and says, "You're going to Camp Blood, ain't you?" And Enos just gets pissed off, and he's like, "Ralph, get the fuck out of here. I don't know what you're talking about. How many times have we told you to not come around here, blah, blah, blah." Enos apologizes, grabs Annie's ass to help her in the truck, and then off they go.
But Ralph pedals away on a girl's bike.
Well, I didn't notice that. Is it his bike, or did he just steal a bike?
He hops on this random bike. We don't know if it's his or not, and he pedals away. But it's a girl's bike. There's a bar that runs toward the front of the bike on boys' bikes that's not there on this bike. So, he's crazy. He's crazy Ralph.
Does that make him an automatic suspect? More so than the broom guy from the diner.
Oh, he's flat out a suspect.
Okay.
Yeah, he's flat out a suspect. He seems too
just
crazy.
the girl's
and
bike, not his personality.
Yeah, if this had been a silent movie and he hopped and rode off on a girl's bike, at least in that era, he would be questionable. We live in more enlightened times, and I think that a person could jump on any bike they choose and pedal off, and no one would give it a second thought. But in that day, that signifies him as crazy.
Can we talk about Enos's truck for a second?
Sure.
So it's a big red. It's actually a really cool truck. Maybe back then it wasn't so cool, but now I feel like that'd be a fun second or third car to have that you just keep in the garage and take out on the weekends. But it's an Elston Oil Supply Company truck. So he's an oil man in this strange town. I can't imagine how much oil that they have to distribute. But they do. And there's a phone number on the truck, which I thought was interesting. So I called the phone number.
No way.
I did. And oddly enough, it is Elston Oil Supply. And they are still in business. And the person I talked... Let me back up real quick. I do not encourage anyone to call the phone number because I'm sure that this is not something that they need to be dealing with. They're actually a place of business, and only idiots like me think it's a good idea to call.
Like people who were calling Wakanda, Illinois, and screaming about vibranium to the mayor.
Precisely. So I called, and I spoke to someone on the phone, and they were very, very nice, and nicer than I was expecting. So I didn't have a long list of questions prepared because I didn't think the conversation was going to go as long as it did. But basically I asked, do they get phone calls? And he said that they do. And he's worked there for about a year and a half. And he said they've gotten maybe 3 or 4 phone calls.
Wow.
Which doesn't seem like a lot, but for a movie that came out in 1980, that's a pretty big deal. And especially since, and it's a little bit easier now because I found the area code via Google. The area code's not listed on the truck itself, but it didn't take, Sherlock Holmes to figure out what the full phone number was. But when I called, and he was very cooperative, and he said most people just want to know if this is the number from the Friday the 13th movie, which is a very strange thing to ask because it obviously is, because you got the number from Friday the 13th and you're calling the number. But yeah, he said they get maybe 3 or 4 calls, or in the year and a half that he's worked there, they've gotten maybe 3 or 4 calls. And I just thought it was interesting that there's other dumbasses out there like me and probably you who just
in Superman the movie. But I'm familiar with that movie, and I'm looking at a screenshot, and it's definitely not him. There's one desk sergeant that I can think of in that movie, and it's played by a visibly younger man, even though they were basically shot within a few years of each other. So I'm not sure if maybe Rex had filmed a scene as the desk sergeant that was reshot with a different actor,
or just
a scene that was cut out, or there was another desk sergeant in the background that was played by Rex Everhart. But that's not him.
Well, the advice that Enos gives Annie, other than just quitting, it's a little bit more specific than that. He basically says that Camp Crystal Lake is jinxed, and she kind of laughs at that, and she's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And he goes, oh no, 2 kids were murdered there in '58, which we saw.
So that's confirmation that Claudette was murdered.
Yeah, so we know that those 2 people were killed. But he also mentions a boy drowning in 1957, which is an interesting development, and I don't really know how that makes the camp jinxed. There's a big lake, at this camp.
Yeah, but they've had a couple of bad incidents in the span of a year or 2.
Yeah, and he also mentions a bunch of fires,
which I found really creepy.
Yeah,
the fact that he didn't go into any detail. The fact that we don't know how many fires or over what period of time, that just a bunch of fires are set out at this camp, this presumably still operating camp, seems super creepy to me.
That is pretty creepy. It's way more creepier. Hearing something like that would make me, pause.
Yeah,
about
I could
going
handle
to a camp more so than like a kid drowning, because
Yeah.
that's just an accident.
Yeah,
but there's definitely some mystery surrounding
that
just
feels a bit more
fires
sinister
that
and
pop up.
menacing. He also mentions some bad water in 1962.
Yeah, and I don't know what that means either, because I'm just presuming that there's a lake because it's called Camp Crystal Lake. So I don't know if it was the lake water that was tainted and that people couldn't go swimming, or if it was the drinking water that was tainted, or perhaps it's both. Maybe they get the drinking water from the lake. I don't know, but that was another less kind of disturbing thing out of all the things he was mentioning. It's like,
bad how?
Yeah.
Like, did it smell funny? Did they do a water sample test and there was poop in it?
right,
Like,
someone
what?
just taking dumps in the well.
Right. What was going on with bad water? But we learned that that the people who ran the camp are now crazy and broke. So this string of bad luck had quite an effect on the owners of this
The Christies.
The
The Christie family. And apparently now their son is trying to reopen the camp himself, and Enos basically predicts the same fate for him that his parents had, which is, broken crazy if he keeps going along with it.
And mentions that Steve Christie has been fixing up this camp for a year, which seems like an awfully long time. I mean, although I suppose if you're having to rebuild cabins that were burned down by mysterious fires or something, that would take some time. And he's already spent $25,000.
That seems like a lot of money.
That does
By
seem like a lot of money.
1979, 80 standards, that's a
Yeah.
lot of money for a camp. I don't know what the hell you could be doing.
So if Steve Christie's parents are crazy and broke, I'm curious where Steve Christie would have come by $25,000. Did he have
Yeah, that's true.
a team of investors that were willing to back his plan to reestablish the family camp? Was money set aside for him in a trust fund that his crazy parents couldn't blow through? I mean, it's interesting that he, maybe he went off to college and became a stockbroker and killed it, and then decided to go back to basics and restore the family glory.
Maybe we'll find out. But it is funny because after all of these warnings that Enos gives Annie, she just kind of shrugs her shoulders and she's like, you don't know what you're talking about. And Enos' response is, kids, know-it-alls, just like my nieces, heads full of rocks. What the hell's wrong with his nieces? I mean, why is he bringing them into this? It's just a very random thing to bring up. So I wonder if that was just the actor ad-libbing, or if it was really just something Enos felt that he, all kids are stupid just like his nieces.
Or maybe it was part of his warning, and his nieces went to the camp and they were crushed by rocks, and that was...
Or set on fire.
Or set on fire.
I don't know.
But basically, she disregards his advice, and he drops her off in front of the Moravian Cemetery, which is a real cemetery. They have some tombstones dating all the way back to the 1890s and perhaps even further. So it's been
that's
around.
Pretty cool.
And it's also not terribly far from Bernardsville, New Jersey, which I have been to. So if I ever have reason to return there, I'm going to try to find the Moravian Cemetery.
Well, it also puts Annie in a weird predicament because we were told that the diner was about 20 miles from Camp Crystal Lake and that Enos was going to drop her off halfway. So she gets dropped off, and it's still the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
And so what was her game plan? Was she just going to hang out there for a while and hope that someone... Because it was a crossroads, and so I guess her chances of a car driving by double because there was more than just one road there.
Right.
But it just didn't seem like the best place to drop her off.
And I mean, what's average human foot speed at a walking pace? Is it 4 miles an hour or something? I mean, she's going to be hiking for a while just to get to camp. What time of day are we looking at here? Is this early in the morning?
I felt like when she was in the town, talking to the dog, it was very early in the morning.
The day was just getting started.
Yeah, and like the people at the diner were probably eating breakfast. And so the ride to the cemetery was not long. It's still probably morning at that point. But yeah, I mean, it's going to take her 25, 30 minutes to walk a mile. And if she's still 10 miles away, she's got a long day ahead of her.
Well, fortunately, some of her coworkers have a ride because they are in a red pickup truck.
Yeah. So there's 3 people in the pickup truck. There's Ned, Marcy, and Kevin fucking Bacon.
Kevin fucking Bacon. They are packed into this red pickup truck, heading down these rural country roads, listening to what sounds to me like either something from the Muppet movie or something that you would hear in the old frontier town section of Kings Island amusement park.
Or when things are going to go bad in Deliverance.
Yeah, yeah. It's a strange...
It's like, yeah, it's just like a weird banjo music, but it does lead me to believe that they're going to fit in perfectly well as counselors because they also listen to lame music, just like the ones that we saw at the beginning of the movie.
Very good point. So the counselors for this camp are very consistent.
So Ned is the driver of the pickup truck.
Okay.
And he, like-minded with Enos, asks Marcy next to him if he thinks there's going to be other gorgeous women at the camp or just her. So he's putting on the moves, and she doesn't really seem to be all that interested. And, Kevin Bacon's just being cool Kevin Bacon and just going along for the ride. But Marcy does ask Ned if sex is all he thinks about, and I wonder if we're going to find out if that's all he thinks about, a little bit later.
That sounds like a good mystery for the future.
So that's all I had for this episode.
Well, so to summarize, the deaths that we have seen so far, merely 2. We have the end of Barry, and we have the vaguely confirmed end of Claudette.
And that was 20 years ago.
And that was 20 years ago. And in terms of suspects that we may have been introduced to, we also have mainly 2. One could argue that Enos would be a suspect, but I don't get that vibe from him.
Yeah, he was too kind in his warning to stay away.
And too personable.
Yeah, to make it seem like he was possibly responsible.
Yeah, so right now we're looking at the busboy and we're looking at Ralph.
And you know who I think it is. So.
We're pretty sure it's the busboy.
I guarantee it's the busboy. They're just trying to throw us off by, calling him Crazy Ralph, the other guy Crazy Ralph. It's too obvious. So yeah, I'm voting with the busboy until I find out differently.
All right. Well, then I'm gonna go off and hit the utility shed. So I'll see you later, Brian.
Do you kiss as well as Mary Ann?
There's only one way to find out.
All right. Well, until next time, I'm Brian.
I'm Greg.
And you're all doomed.